Before anything existed, before light, before sound, before the first breath of any living being, something was already moving. Not in a loud way, not with fanfare, but with a quiet intensity that feels almost impossible to describe. Imagine standing on the edge of absolute nothingness and sensing that something is about to begin, something vast, deliberate, and filled with intention. The story does not open with a hero or a battle or even a setting. It begins with a voice that speaks into a silent void and forces reality to appear. And suddenly the darkness cracks open, light bursts forward, time starts ticking, space stretches outward. The universe shifts from stillness to structure in a single command. What if this moment was not just the beginning of creation, but the beginning of a story written for you as well? What if the first words of Genesis were not an ancient account, but the first page of a narrative that has been reaching across ages, waiting for you to step inside it? This is why the opening of the Bible feels so different from any other beginning. It does not warm up slowly. It does not ease the reader in. It throws you into the center of a cosmic transition, from nothing to everything, from silence to purpose. And before you can even process what happened, the story moves again. Light separates from darkness. Waters rise and fall. Land rises from beneath the deep. The world forms like a masterpiece coming into focus. Every detail seems intentional, like a careful step in a plan that has no mistakes. But the most important part is not the sky or the seas or the stars that fill the night. The story pauses. It waits. Almost as if creation itself is holding its breath for what comes next. A different kind of creation. Something personal. Something that reflects the voice that started it all. Dust is shaped, breath enters. A human opens his eyes for the first time, and the first thing he sees is the one who formed him. This moment does not feel distant or symbolic. It feels direct, intimate, almost unsettling in how personal it is. The idea that the Creator bends down to form a human by hand is not a small detail. It changes everything about the story. It means humanity was not an afterthought. It means you were not an accident. It means existence itself was shaped with intention. But the story does not stop with one human. There is another pause, another moment where creation shifts direction. A second human is formed, not from dust this time, but from the side of the first. Not as an accessory, not as a servant, but as an equal. Two beings designed to walk in a world without fear, without pain, without confusion. A world where everything worked. A world where nothing was broken. A world where the presence of God was not distant but familiar. And then, almost too quickly, the tone changes. A new voice enters the story, not loud, not obvious. A whisper that questions what God said. Not with a direct attack, but with a small challenge to trust. And that is all it takes. A choice, a moment, a single act that breaks the harmony of everything that came before. The story that began with intention and beauty shifts into something more complex. Shame appears, fear appears, distance appears. Humanity hides from the very presence it once walked with freely. Why does the story turn so sharply? Why does a perfect world break so fast? Why is the moment of disobedience described with such emotional weight? The answer might not be obvious at first, but the narrative gives you clues. The Creator does not respond with rage or abandonment. The Creator searches, calls out, covers their shame. And even in judgment, something unexpected appears, a promise, a quiet statement that someone will come. Someone who will break the power of the one who deceived them. Someone who will crush what was meant to destroy them, even if it costs him suffering to do it. This is where the story becomes more than a record. It becomes a mystery opening into another mystery, a fall that hides a future victory, a loss that hides a future restoration, a garden that becomes a starting point instead of an ending. And the question that rises from this moment is simple but powerful. If the first humans were never abandoned, what does that mean for you? The early chapters of the Bible are not there to answer every question. They are there to create new ones. They draw you into a story that moves across time, across generations, across countless lives. They make you wonder why a perfect creation was allowed to fall. They make you wonder why a promise was made so early, long before anyone understood what it meant. They make you wonder why the Creator chose to stay involved even when humans turned away. And this is the tension that keeps the story alive. A Creator who refuses to step back, a humanity that constantly struggles with its own choices, a promise that quietly grows in the background of every event that follows. The narrative invites you to look at creation, not as a distant past, but as the foundation of a mystery that keeps unfolding. It asks you to consider why you exist, why the world feels both beautiful and broken, why people search for meaning even when they try to ignore the one who designed them. Something began in those first chapters that has never stopped moving. It pulls the reader forward. It sets the stage for conflict, hope, tension, and redemption. And as you follow the story, the question becomes harder to ignore. If the Creator never gave up on the first humans, why would he give up on any human now? The creation and fall are not just ancient events. They are the opening of a story that still affects every moment of human experience. They explain why we feel longing, why we feel conflict within ourselves, why we are drawn to light even when we walk through darkness. And they quietly prepare you for everything that the story is about to reveal. Before you scroll or close the video, comment the word beginning if you felt the pull of this story, and leave a like so this message reaches more people who need it. It begins with a strange silence. Not the peaceful silence of a calm world, but the heavy silence that comes right before something collapses. A silence that feels like a warning. A silence that makes you wonder how far humanity has drifted from the harmony it once knew. The story does not ease you into this moment. It confronts you with a world that has become almost unrecognizable from the beauty of Eden. Something has shifted. Something has gone wrong. And you can feel the tension even before the text tells you why. Imagine watching a world that was once full of life begin to lose its direction. People growing stronger in violence, not wisdom. Hearts drifting toward chaos, not purpose. The early chapters give only glimpses, but each glimpse feels like a step towards something irreversible. You start to sense a question forming beneath the surface. How long can a world built on order survive when its people choose disorder? And before you can answer, the narrative reveals that even the heavens have been disturbed. Beings that were meant to remain in the unseen realm step into the human world with intentions that twist everything they touch. This is where the story becomes darker. The ancient text of Enoch describes things that the main biblical narrative only hints at. A corruption that runs deeper than human ignorance. A mixing of worlds that was never meant to happen. And suddenly the violence, the confusion, the moral collapse all make sense. The world is no longer simply broken, it is infected. And the infection spreads so quickly that even the Creator expresses grief over what humanity has become. This is the moment where the story could end. But instead, something unexpected appears. A man. One man who still listens. One man who still walks with God when everyone around him walks away. The shift is sharp. The atmosphere changes. The tension moves from despair to possibility. But it also raises a new question. Why him? Why Noah? Why would a single individual matter in a world that seems beyond repair? The answer is not explained. It is shown. Noah listens, Noah obeys, Noah builds, and with every piece of wood he lifts, the story builds a sense of urgency. Something is coming, something the world cannot escape, something that will erase everything except what Noah carries inside a structure that makes no sense to anyone but the one who commanded it. Picture the reactions of the people around him, the looks, the doubts, the mockery, the idea that water could fall from the sky in a way no one had ever seen, the idea that an entire world could face judgment. It must have sounded like madness, and yet Noah keeps building, every day, every month, every year. His life becomes a warning that no one wants to hear, a sign that no one wants to interpret, a question that no one wants to answer. What if the impossible is about to happen? Then the rain begins. The sky opens. The deep breaks apart. A world that felt untouchable is shaken to its core. The sound of rushing water replaces the silence that opened this chapter. Everything that defined human civilization disappears beneath rising waters. And in the middle of this devastation, the ark floats, a single vessel holding everything needed to begin again, a physical reminder that even judgment contains mercy. But the story does not stay on the surface of the flood. It pushes you to confront something else. Why would God decide to start over and still choose to preserve humanity? Why not end the story there? The answer appears when the waters recede, when the ark rests, when dry ground returns, a covenant. A promise that the world will never again face destruction on this scale. The rainbow becomes a sign that judgment and mercy are both part of the same story. But even with this promise, something else is taking shape. Humanity is about to face a different kind of test, not one of survival, one of ambition. The world begins to repopulate, people grow strong again, civilizations form, but instead of learning from the past, a familiar desire rises within them. The desire to build something that proves they no longer need God, a tower, a city, a plan to climb upward through their own power, their own achievements, their own name. It is not about reaching heaven, it is about replacing it. The tension here is subtle but powerful. Why would people who survived a global disaster choose pride again? Why would they ignore a warning written across the sky itself? The Tower of Babel becomes the symbol of this question. A structure built not from humility, but from collective arrogance. A project that unites humanity, not in purpose, but in rebellion. And once again the story shifts. The movement of God is quiet, but decisive. Language fractures, communication breaks. The tower stops, the people scatter. It is not destruction, it is interruption. A pattern break designed to prevent something worse. A reminder that unity without truth leads to disaster. But hidden inside this moment of scattering is the beginning of something new, something that will change the direction of the entire narrative, because once the nations spread across the earth, the story narrows to one man again, a man who does not build towers, a man who does not follow the pride of the world, a man who hears a voice that tells him to leave everything he knows for something he cannot yet see. This is where the next phase of the story begins. A promise. A journey. A new covenant with a man named Abraham. And the promise given to him will eventually shape the history of nations, the rise of kingdoms, the birth of prophets, and the arrival of the Messiah. But it all begins here, in the aftermath of a flood and the ruins of a tower. A cycle of destruction and rebuilding that reveals the deeper question beneath every chapter so far. What kind of world is God trying to create, and what kind of people does He call to build it with Him? Before you leave, comment the word awakening if you felt the tension and mystery of this part, and leave a like to help this message reach more people searching for understanding. Sometimes a story shifts so suddenly that it feels like the world itself takes a breath before moving again. That is exactly what happens now. After the chaos of the flood and the scattering at Babel, the narrative does something unexpected. It zooms in, not on a nation, not on a city, not on a miracle, on a single family. And at first, this seems almost too small, too quiet, too ordinary to matter. But the mystery of the Bible is that the smallest beginnings often hide the largest destinies. So the question appears almost immediately: why this family? Why this man called Abraham? The story does not give a long explanation. It gives a calling, a voice telling a man to leave his home, his comfort, his identity, and step into a land he has never seen. Imagine hearing that. Imagine having nothing but a promise to guide you, no map, no guarantee. Just a voice and a direction. This is where the tension begins, because Abraham does not argue. He does not demand a sign. He moves, and with every step into unfamiliar territory, the story grows in weight. Something is forming, something that will outlive him, something connected not only to his family, but to the future of nations. But the promise he receives creates its own mystery. A great nation will come from him, a child, a legacy. Yet he and Sarah wait for years, with nothing changing. The longer the promise delays, the stronger the tension becomes. How do you hold on to a promise when everything around you contradicts it? How do you trust a future that feels impossible? Their struggle makes the story feel painfully human: hope, doubt, frustration, faith. Yet even with their missteps, the covenant remains. And finally, the impossible happens. A child is born. Isaac arrives, and the story moves again. Because now the promise has a heartbeat. Now the covenant has a future. But the narrative does not pause to celebrate. It shifts again to a test that feels almost unbearable. Abraham is asked to surrender the very promise he waited his whole life to receive. No explanations, no reasons, only a command. And as he climbs the mountain with Isaac beside him, the tension becomes almost unbearable. You can feel the weight of every step, the silence between them. The unresolved question: why would God ask for this? And when the moment reaches its peak, when the knife is lifted, everything stops. A voice calls out, the test ends, and what looked like a story of loss becomes a revelation of trust. A ram appears. Isaac lives, and the promise is sealed stronger than before. This pattern of tension and release becomes the rhythm of the entire narrative. Isaac grows. He becomes a husband, a father. But the quietness of his life is interrupted by a conflict that will shape generations. Two sons, Esau and Jacob, struggling even before their birth. A rivalry so intense that it feels like two destinies colliding inside one house. Jacob, the younger, becomes the center of the story, not because he is strong, but because he is persistent, restless, driven by something he does not fully understand. He wants the blessing. He wants the birthright. He wants the destiny that does not belong to him, and he goes after it through bargains, deception, and bold moves that leave scars on everyone involved. But the story does not let Jacob stay the same. It confronts him. In the middle of the night, alone, running from the consequences of his past, he wrestles with a mysterious figure. The struggle lasts until dawn. It is not just physical, it is spiritual, emotional, transformational. Jacob refuses to let go until he receives a blessing, and he does. But the blessing comes with something else, a new name, Israel, the name that will define a nation, the name that marks a turning point in the entire biblical narrative. Jacob's life becomes a story of transformation, proving that destiny does not require perfection, only surrender. But just when the story feels like it has found its direction, it shifts again. It moves to one of Jacob's sons, Joseph, a young man whose dreams create tension even before anything happens, dreams that suggest he will rise above his brothers, dreams that make him a threat in their eyes. And this tension grows until jealousy turns into betrayal. Joseph is sold, abandoned, taken to Egypt, a land that will shape his destiny in ways no one could imagine. But what makes Joseph's story powerful is not his suffering. It is what he becomes through it, even in betrayal, even in prison. Even when forgotten, he stays faithful, he uses his gifts, and suddenly the story opens again. Pharaoh dreams. No one can interpret the message except Joseph, and in a single moment, everything changes. He rises from prisoner to ruler, a foreigner becoming second in command over one of the most powerful empires on earth. But the story is not finished, because Joseph's purpose is not only about his own rise. It is about a famine that will bring his brothers back into his life, a reunion filled with tension, guilt, fear, and recognition. Joseph stands before the very men who destroyed his youth. And instead of revenge, he offers forgiveness. Instead of judgment, he offers mercy. And with that decision, the entire future of Israel is preserved. What began with one man now becomes a nation in formation. Joseph brings his family to Egypt. They settle, they grow, they multiply. And over time, their presence becomes a threat to a new Pharaoh who does not remember Joseph. The shift happens slowly but decisively. Freedom becomes slavery. Honor becomes oppression. The chosen family becomes a nation of laborers trapped under a ruler who fears their strength. The tension reaches a new level. Will the promise survive? Will the covenant endure? Will God intervene? And the answer arrives in the form of a child hidden in a basket. A child placed among the reeds of the Nile. A child rescued by the very empire that seeks to destroy his people. Moses grows between two identities, Hebrew by blood, Egyptian by upbringing, divided between loyalty and confusion, searching for who he is supposed to become. And when he finally steps into his calling, the story of Israel shifts again. The plagues, the confrontation with Pharaoh, the night of Passover, the Red Sea opening, each moment intensifies the narrative. Each moment pushes Israel closer to freedom and deeper into purpose. But freedom is not the end. It is the beginning of another challenge, the desert. A place where expectations collapse and character is tested. A place where miracles happen daily, yet doubt rises again and again. A place where the people learn that liberation is not the same as transformation. And the tension that began with Abraham now continues through an entire nation learning to trust the one who called them. This is the journey of the patriarchs, the rise of Joseph, the call of Moses, and the forming of a people who carry a promise older than their own history. And the story only grows more intense from here. Before you scroll, comment the word "ascend" if this part kept you engaged, and leave a like to help this journey reach more people who need it. There is a moment in every great story where the ground shifts beneath the characters, forcing them into a new chapter, whether they are ready or not. For Israel, that moment arrives the instant they cross the Jordan River. It is not dramatic like the parting of the Red Sea, nor as terrifying as the plagues in Egypt, yet there is something powerful in this crossing. It feels like an invisible line no one can step back over, a line between wandering and becoming, between promise spoken and promise lived. And the question that hangs in the air is simple but impossible to ignore. What happens when a people who have never known stability finally step into their destiny? The narrative wastes no time answering. The first thing they face is a city that seems impossible to conquer. Jericho rises before them with walls so high they look like they touch the sky. It is the kind of obstacle that stops people before they even try. But instead of giving them strategies or weapons or instructions that make sense, God gives them something strange. March around the walls. Do it again. Do it again. Then shout. It sounds almost ridiculous. Too simple, too slow, too unexpected. And yet, this becomes the pattern of the entire story, victories that happen in ways no one could predict. When the walls collapse, something deeper opens as well. The belief that a nation with no military background can defeat forces far stronger than themselves. But victory, as always, brings its own complications. The next battle exposes a weakness inside the people. Disobedience, hidden actions, a single person breaking the command, yet the consequences fall on everyone. And suddenly Israel realizes that the land they are entering is not just a gift. It is a responsibility. A place where obedience determines survival. A place where every choice matters, and this tension becomes a thread pulling the story forward. Conquest after conquest, territory gained, alliances formed, land divided, a promise unfolding piece by piece. But when Joshua dies, a new kind of silence falls over the people. Not the silence of peace, the silence of uncertainty. Who leads now? Who speaks for God? Who protects them from the enemies waiting beyond the borders? And into that silence rises a cycle that becomes both disturbing and strangely familiar. The people drift away. They grow comfortable. They forget. And when they forget, they fall. Not because of armies or kings, but because of their own choices. They abandon the one who brought them out of Egypt, and the world presses in on them again. This is where the era of the judges begins, but it doesn't begin with strength. It begins with desperation. Every judge rises only because the people hit a breaking point. Their cries reach God, and he raises someone to pull them out of the chaos. And each judge feels different, unpredictable, almost like a pattern interruption inside the narrative. Deborah appears in a moment when courage is scarce, a woman leading a nation when no one else will, someone whose presence alone inspires victory. Then comes Gideon, the man who doubts everything, including himself. Called to deliver Israel while hiding from his enemies, yet his small army, reduced on purpose, defeats an army too large to count. Another unexpected victory, another reminder that the story moves on a path no one could design. But the cycle continues. Israel falls again, another judge rises, and then you reach Samson. Unlike the others, Samson is a contradiction in human form, strong but reckless, chosen but impulsive. A man who carries a calling he cannot fully control. His story feels different because it is shaped by internal conflict rather than external enemies. Yet even through his failures, the promise keeps moving. This chaotic rhythm reveals something important. Israel's greatest threat is not the nations surrounding them. It is their inability to remain faithful, their struggle with identity, their desire to blend into the cultures around them rather than stand apart. And this tension builds until the people demand something they were never meant to have. A king, a visible leader, a human authority, someone to replace the God they cannot see. At first, the idea seems hopeful. A king could bring structure, strength, direction. But the moment they ask, a sense of unease enters the story. The request reveals something deeper, misplaced trust. And Saul becomes the first example of how complicated this path will be. He starts strong, confident, impressive, but his insecurity becomes a shadow that grows with every decision. The more he tries to control, the more he loses, until he loses everything. And then the story interrupts itself with a surprise. A shepherd, a young man who seems too ordinary, too quiet, too overlooked to become anything significant. David appears without the qualities anyone expects from a king. But his heart, his trust, his relationship with God become the foundation of a new era. His victory over Goliath is not about strength. It is about something deeper. The belief that the impossible is possible when your confidence comes from the right place. David's rise becomes a turning point. His reign brings unity, worship, expansion. Yet his life is not perfect. His failures carry consequences that ripple through the nation. But even when he falls, his willingness to return to God becomes the defining mark of his character. And from him, the promise takes shape again. A lineage, a throne, a future king whose reign will never end. When Solomon takes the throne, the nation enters a season of prosperity unlike anything before. Wisdom, wealth, peace, influence. The building of the temple becomes the center of Israel's identity. For a moment, it feels like the promise has reached fulfillment, but Solomon's heart fractures. His alliances with foreign nations bring foreign gods. His choices divide the loyalty of the people, and what was united becomes divided again. North and south, Israel and Judah. 2. Kingdoms walking two different paths, both heading toward danger. Prophets rise to warn them. Elijah calls down fire. Elisha performs miracles. Isaiah speaks of a coming Messiah. Jeremiah weeps over the future destruction. Yet the people continue to drift. Idolatry grows. Injustice spreads. Kings rise and fall, some faithful, most corrupt. And the tension builds until it breaks. The northern kingdom collapses first, then Judah falls. Jerusalem burns. The temple is destroyed. The people are taken into exile. The promise looks shattered. The story looks lost. But even here, hidden inside judgment, the mystery continues. God has not abandoned them. He is reshaping them. Exile becomes a refining fire, a place where identity is rebuilt, a place where hope is preserved, a place where the people wait for the next move of the one who has been guiding the narrative from the beginning. And just when it seems like the story has reached its darkest point, something begins to shift again. The stage is being prepared for the arrival of someone who will change everything. Before you move on, comment, "Promise endures" if this chapter pulled you in, and leave a like to help the next part reach more people who are following this journey. Everything feels different now. The story that once moved through kings, judges, empires, and rebellions suddenly narrows into something quiet enough to miss if you do not look closely. It begins not with a throne, not with a battlefield, not with a prophet shouting warnings from a mountaintop, but with a birth in a small town most of the world ignores. And this is the first pattern interruption that grabs your attention. After centuries of waiting, centuries of silence, centuries of longing for the promised one, the arrival of the Messiah does not enter history with spectacle. It enters through vulnerability, through humility, through a child whose cry begins the most important chapter of the human story. But the moment you think this beginning is too small to matter, something strange happens. The sky moves. Shepherds hear voices. Angels fill the night with a message no one has heard in generations. A savior has been born, and before you can process that, distant travelers begin a journey guided only by a mysterious star. It is as if creation itself recognizes something humans have not yet understood. Something has changed, something has shifted, something ancient has awakened again. The child grows, quietly, hidden from the centers of power, hidden from the eyes of kings, hidden from the momentum of empires, but not hidden from purpose. When Jesus finally steps into public view, the world does not know what to do with him. He teaches with authority no one can explain. He speaks with simplicity that disarms the proud and comforts the broken. He performs acts that break every expectation of what is possible. And this creates tension that pulls the listener deeper. Who is he? How does he do this? Why does everything he touches change? Each moment of his ministry becomes another interruption to the normal rhythm of life. A blind man sees again. A paralytic stands and walks. A storm stops at a single command. Thousands eat from a handful of bread. And every time the question grows louder, what kind of person carries this kind of power? Yet at the same time, he never behaves like the leaders people expected. He does not chase authority. He does not seek recognition. He sits with the overlooked, speaks with the outcasts, and challenges the people who believe they already understand God. But then the tension sharpens, the crowds grow, the miracles increase, and the religious leaders begin to feel threatened. They cannot control him, they cannot discredit him, they cannot predict him, so they plot to remove him. The story suddenly accelerates toward conflict. Jesus enters Jerusalem, knowing exactly what waits for him. The people celebrate his arrival, but behind their voices is the shadow of betrayal. The Last Supper becomes a final warning, a final promise, a final act of love before everything collapses. And then it happens. The arrest, the trial, the accusations, the sentence, the cross, the death, the silence. For a moment it feels like the entire story of the Bible breaks. Like every prophecy, every promise, every movement of God through history has led to a dead end. But this is where the narrative reveals its greatest mystery. Because the moment everyone assumes the story is over is the moment everything actually begins. On the third day, the tomb is found empty, the stone is moved, the body is gone, and Jesus appears again, alive. The resurrection becomes the turning point not only of the Bible, but of human history. Death loses its power. Fear loses its control. Hope becomes something real, not symbolic. And with this, the story moves into a new era, one shaped not by law, not by monarchy, not by sacrifice, but by a kingdom that grows through transformed hearts. But Jesus does not stay long. He gives a command, a mission, a purpose. Go and make disciples of all nations. Then, as the disciples watch, he rises into the sky. And once again, silence follows. But not the silence of loss, the silence of anticipation, because something is about to happen that will change ordinary people into world changers. Pentecost breaks that silence. A sound like wind fills the room. Fire rests on each person. The Holy Spirit arrives. The same power that raised Jesus from the dead enters the lives of his followers, and instantly everything changes again. Fear turns into courage, confusion turns into clarity, silence turns into proclamation. Peter, once afraid to admit he knew Jesus, now stands before thousands and declares that the Messiah has come, and thousands believe. This becomes the beginning of the early church, a community that grows daily, a community that gives generously, a community that prays, learns, shares, and supports one another, a community whose unity itself becomes a sign of God's presence. But this new movement does not grow without resistance. Persecution begins, opposition rises, and the first martyr, Stephen, gives his life with a courage that shocks everyone who witnesses it. One of the men standing nearby, ready to destroy this new movement, becomes the next major shift in the story. Saul, a man determined to eliminate the followers of Jesus. A man convinced he is protecting God's truth, until a voice stops him on the road. A light surrounds him, and he hears the name of the one he has been fighting. I am Jesus. The moment Saul rises from that encounter blind, the audience senses a coming transformation. And when his sight returns, so does his purpose. Saul becomes Paul, the greatest missionary in the history of the early church. Paul travels across cities, seas, and cultures. He plants communities of believers. He writes letters that explain the depth of the gospel. He endures imprisonment, danger, and rejection, yet never stops. His words shape doctrine. His journeys shape history. His transformation becomes proof that no one is too far gone for God to use. Meanwhile, other voices rise with him. Peter writes to suffering believers. James calls the church to live out their faith. John speaks of love, truth, and the reality of following Christ. Women like Mary Magdalene, Priscilla, and Phoebe become leaders, teachers, and key pillars of this growing movement. The story of Jesus becomes a story carried by real people living in real struggles, proving that the message is not about perfection, it is about transformation. Every chapter pulls you deeper into a movement that refuses to die, because it is not built on fear or power or tradition, it is built on resurrection. On a message strong enough to reshape the world and gentle enough to reach one person at a time. And everything that comes next leads directly into the final and most mysterious chapter of the entire biblical narrative. Before you continue, comment, "Awaken the Kingdom," if this part kept you engaged, and leave a like so this story reaches others who need to hear it. It begins with a sense that something in the story is shifting again, but this time the shift feels larger than anything before it. Everything that has happened, from creation to exile to resurrection, starts pulling together like the final pieces of a pattern that has been forming since the first page. And the strange part is that you can feel the tension rise before the text even says anything. It is the tension of knowing a revelation is coming, something hidden, something promised, something final. The Bible now opens the door to its most mysterious chapter, and the only question is whether you are willing to step through it. The moment the book of Revelation begins, everything feels different. John is not writing from a throne room or a battlefield, but from exile, alone on a rocky island, far from the world he once knew. Yet isolation becomes the gateway to the most powerful vision ever recorded. A voice calls his name with a sound he cannot describe. The atmosphere changes, and John turns to see someone he recognizes and yet does not fully understand. Jesus stands before him, not as the teacher from Galilee, not as the suffering Messiah on the cross, but as the risen King whose presence shakes everything around him. And this is the first sign that the story you thought you knew is about to expand far beyond the limits of earthly experience. The vision moves quickly. Letters to churches filled with warnings, encouragement, and promises, each letter opening wounds and revealing truths about human nature that still apply today. Some have grown cold, some have stayed faithful, some are distracted, some are deceived. And each message feels like it is not only for them, but for anyone who reads these words centuries later. The tone shifts again when John is taken into the throne room of heaven. Suddenly the scene explodes with sound, movement, and overwhelming majesty. A throne surrounded by beings that never stop declaring God's power. A scroll sealed with 7 seals that no one can open. And the rising tension that the entire future of creation depends on someone stepping forward. Then the Lamb appears. The same Jesus once nailed to a cross now stands as the only one worthy to open the scroll. When the first seal breaks, the story moves into a sequence of events that shake the world to its core. Riders, judgments, earthquakes, darkness, voices crying out for justice. But even in the middle of fear and destruction, there is a thread of protection woven through it. A group sealed by God, a great multitude worshipping. A reminder that the story is not about chaos winning. It is about chaos being confronted by the one who always had authority over it. The pace intensifies, trumpets sound, bowls are poured out, nations tremble. Yet every judgment has a purpose. Every moment pushes the narrative towards something greater. A spiritual war becomes clearer. A dragon, a beast, a false prophet. Forces that represent deception, corruption, and rebellion. And suddenly the world does not feel distant from this vision. It feels connected. It feels relevant. It feels like Revelation is not just describing events long ago or far ahead, but revealing patterns that play out across every generation. But the story does not stay in darkness. A turning point appears as Babylon falls, a symbol of everything humanity builds without God. Its collapse becomes the sign that something new is finally coming. Heaven responds with celebration, voices rise, and then the most anticipated moment arrives. A rider on a white horse appears, faithful and true, a king whose authority no one can challenge. Jesus returns not in weakness, but in unmistakable power. The war ends, evil is defeated, the enemy is silenced forever, and when the dust settles, something incredible happens. The story that began with a garden ends with a city. A new Jerusalem descends. A new creation unfolds. Everything broken is restored. Everything lost is recovered. Everything separated is reunited. The voice that once commanded light into existence now speaks again, declaring that death, pain, and sorrow no longer exist. Humanity's greatest fear disappears in a single moment, and the promise given in Genesis finds its completion. Here, God dwelling with his people once more, the vision shows a world we were always meant to experience, a world without fear, a world without division, a world without suffering, a world defined by presence, purpose, and peace. The river of life flows freely. The tree of life returns, and the story that has been moving through centuries finally reveals its destination. Yet even here, the final chapter does not close abruptly. It ends with an invitation, a promise, a warning, a reminder that the story is not only something to read, but something to respond to. Jesus declares that he is coming soon, and the question that echoes through time is simple. Are you ready for the continuation of a story that has never stopped unfolding? You can feel the weight of these final words. They are not the end of the narrative. They are the beginning of eternity. They are the reminder that you have a place inside this story. You are not watching from the outside. You are being invited to walk forward, to understand, to hope, to live with awareness that history is moving towards something intentional, something personal, something promised long ago. If this final chapter opened your curiosity, your awe, or your sense of purpose, comment, "I am part of the story, so I know you made it to the end." And if you want to keep receiving content like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next journey we explore together.